your own. Today, our story begins not under the bright lights of Los Angeles or New York, but on a quiet Christmas tree farm in Wyoming, Pennsylvania. Here, in 1989, a little girl named Taylor Allison Swift was born. On the surface, she came from an ordinary American family. But inside this girl burned something extraordinary. From her earliest years, Taylor loved words, poems, books, short stories scribbled in spiral notebooks. And soon, words alone weren't enough. She discovered music. Her grandmother had been an opera singer, and Taylor grew up studying Shania Twain, Faith Hill, and the Dixie Chicks. At school talent shows, she sang with a voice that wasn't polished, but it carried honesty. And honesty is what people remembered. By the time she was 10, something in her heart whispered, "This isn't just a hobby. This is who I am." Our story begins not under the bright lights of Los Angeles or New York, but on a quiet Christmas tree farm in Wyoming, Pennsylvania. Taylor Allison Swift was born in 1989 into a family that valued hard work and faith. Her father, Scott, was a financial advisor. Her mother, Andrea, worked in marketing before dedicating herself to raising her children. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary middle-class American family. But inside this little girl burned something extraordinary. From the moment she could talk, Taylor had a fascination with words. She loved poems. She loved books. She loved the way sentences could create feelings that lingered. When most kids were playing with dolls, Taylor was writing short stories in spiral notebooks. Her imagination had no boundaries. But soon, words alone weren't enough. She discovered music. Her grandmother had been an opera singer, and Taylor grew up surrounded by records of Shania Twain, Faith Hill, and the Dixie Chicks. She wasn't just listening, she was studying. Line by line, chorus by chorus, she was learning how music could carry emotion deeper than words ever could. At school talent shows, she was shy, but brave. She sang with a voice that wasn't polished yet, but it carried honesty. And honesty is what people remembered. By the time she was 10 years old, something in her heart whispered, "This isn't just a hobby. This is who I am." One afternoon, fate intervened. A family friend showed Taylor a few chords on the guitar. Just 3 chords. But sometimes, 3 chords are enough to change the world. Taylor became obsessed. She practiced until her fingertips ached and blistered. While other kids watched cartoons, she locked herself in her room, strumming, writing, rewriting. The guitar became her closest friend. And soon, words and music merged into songs. Real songs. Not nursery rhymes, but reflections of her heart. She wrote about crushes, about doubts, about hopes. It was raw, it was innocent, but it was also powerful, because it was real. At just 11 years old, she convinced her parents to help her record a demo CD.
She filled it with her original songs, and they drove nearly 700 miles to Nashville, Tennessee, the home of country music, the city where legends are born. Imagine it, an 11-year-old girl walking into record label offices on Music Row, CD in hand, heart pounding, hope shining in her eyes. She sat in lobbies filled with adults, managers, industry people. And when her turn came, she introduced herself with fearless innocence. "Hi, I'm Taylor. I write my own songs." But one by one, the doors closed. "No, you're too young. You're not ready." She left office after office with rejection ringing in her ears. For many children, that would have been the end. But for Taylor Swift, rejection wasn't the end of her story. It was just the first chapter. Taylor went back to Pennsylvania, carrying those no's in her pocket. But instead of crushing her, they fueled her. She practiced harder. She wrote more. She performed anywhere she could. School assemblies, local fairs, coffee shops, karaoke nights. No stage was too small. Every performance was practice. Every empty chair was a test. Every polite applause was fuel. She was building resilience long before the world knew her name. Her parents watched closely. They didn't just see talent. They saw fire, a determination that was rare even in adults, let alone in a child. And so they made a decision that would change everything. The Swifts uprooted their family and moved to Hendersonville, Tennessee, a suburb just outside of Nashville. Why? Because Taylor needed to be closer to the dream, closer to the very city that had told her no. At just 14, Taylor Swift was walking into Nashville again. But this time, she wasn't a little girl with a demo CD. She was a songwriter with notebooks full of lyrics, a guitarist with calloused fingers, and a dream that had only grown stronger. She had learned her first great lesson. Rejection is not the end. It is redirection. And very soon, that redirection would open the door to a breakthrough the world could not ignore. Nashville, the city of dreams and the city of broken hearts. Every street corner, every neon bar, every recording studio carried the echoes of hopeful voices, and most of those voices were never heard again. Taylor Swift had already been here once. She had walked these streets with a demo CD at the age of 11, and every door had closed in her face. But now, just a few years later, she was back. This time, not as a curious child, but as a teenager with fire in her eyes. By the time she was 13, she had already signed a development deal with RCA Records. It was a start, but it didn't last. The label wanted her to wait, to stay in the background, to maybe write for other artists until she was older. But waiting was not in Taylor's DNA. She didn't want to be a ghostwriter. She didn't want to sing words that weren't her own. She wanted to tell her story directly. And when RCA refused, she walked away. A bold move for a girl barely in her teens. And then fate intervened. Scott Borchetta, a former DreamWorks executive, was starting his own record label. A risky venture, a brand new company with no history, no stars, no guarantees. But Borchetta had one thing, a belief that Taylor Swift was worth betting on. Taylor signed with Big Machine Records. It was a leap of faith on both sides. For Borchetta, she was the first artist of his new label. For Taylor, this was her second chance to make Nashville listen. And this time, she would not be ignored. In 2006, Taylor released her very first single, Tim McGraw. It wasn't just a clever title. It was a story. A teenage girl remembering a summer romance anchored in the music of a country superstar. The song wasn't flashy. It wasn't overproduced. It was simple, honest, and real. And people noticed. Country radio gave it a chance. Fans began to request it. And suddenly, this teenager from Pennsylvania was being introduced on the charts alongside names she had grown up idolizing. Later that year, she released her self-titled debut album, Taylor Swift. It was filled with songs written straight from her diary. Teardrops on My Guitar, Our Song, Pictured to Burn. Every track was a snapshot of adolescence, awkward crushes, heartbreak, rebellion. And that was the magic. She wasn't trying to be older than she was. She wasn't pretending. She was singing about being 15, 16, 17. And suddenly, millions of teenagers felt seen. The album was a sleeper hit. It stayed on the Billboard 200 for nearly 300 weeks, a record-breaking run for a debut artist. By the time the world realized it, Taylor Swift had quietly become country music's newest star. But she wasn't done. She wasn't here for one good album. She wanted to change the game entirely. And the next record would do exactly that.
In 2008, Taylor released her second album, Fearless. And suddenly, the girl from the Christmas tree farm became a global phenomenon. Love Story exploded. It was a modern-day Romeo and Juliet, but with the ending everyone wished for. A fairy tale anthem that teenagers sang at the top of their lungs and parents secretly sang along with in their cars. You Belong With Me, an anthem for every outsider, every kid who felt invisible, every teenager who had watched someone they loved love someone else. Fearless wasn't just an album, it was a movement. It topped the Billboard 200 for 11 weeks. It became the best-selling album of 2009, and it won the Grammy for Album of the Year, making Taylor, at just 20, the youngest artist ever to receive the award. But numbers and trophies tell only part of the story. The real magic was what happened at her concerts, when tens of thousands of fans screamed her lyrics back at her, word for word, like they weren't just her songs, but their songs. Taylor's breakthrough wasn't built on hype. It wasn't built on industry machines or manufactured images. It was built on truth, on a girl who refused to take no for an answer, who wrote her own life into songs, and who proved that authenticity, when sung fearlessly, could move the entire world. This was no longer the story of a girl chasing Nashville's approval. This was the story of a woman beginning to conquer the world. By 2009, Taylor Swift was no longer just a country star.
She was becoming a household name. Her album, Fearless, had taken over the charts. Her face was everywhere: magazines, television, red carpets. At just 19 years old, she had already achieved what most artists dream of in a lifetime. But with fame comes pressure. The spotlight that shines so brightly can also burn. Every move, every outfit, every word was suddenly up for judgment, and the world, it seemed, couldn't get enough of her. Yet beneath the smiles and sold-out shows, Taylor was still a teenager. And the truth about fame is this: it doesn't come with a handbook. There are no lessons in school for how to handle global stardom. You have to learn in real time, under the harshest lights. In September of 2009, Taylor walked into the MTV Video Music Awards. She was nominated for Best Female Video for her hit, You Belong With Me. It was the kind of recognition she had dreamed about. And that night, her dream came true. Her name was called. She had won. She walked on stage, smiling nervously, clutching her Silver Moon Man trophy. For a moment, she was just a girl living out her dream, a young country singer making history. But then, it happened. Kanye West, one of the biggest names in hip-hop, stormed onto the stage. He grabbed the microphone out of her hands, and in front of millions watching around the world, he said, "I'm sorry, but Beyoncé had one of the best videos of all time." The crowd gasped. Taylor stood frozen, speechless, humiliated. This was supposed to be her moment, her victory. But instead, it became one of the most infamous moments in pop culture history. The cameras cut to Beyoncé, who looked horrified. Security escorted Kanye off the stage, but the damage was already done. Taylor's smile had faded. Her voice never got the chance to finish her speech. For days, the incident dominated headlines. The story wasn't her win, but her humiliation. It was the first time the world saw Taylor Swift not just as an artist, but as a target. The morning after the incident, the world divided itself into teams. Was she the victim? Was he the villain? Was it real? Was it staged? Taylor did what she always did when the noise grew too loud. She went quiet and she wrote. Weeks later, at the very same ceremony, Beyoncé won Video of the Year. She called Taylor back to the stage and handed her the microphone, a gesture of grace that let a moment of chaos end with dignity. Taylor smiled, thanked her, and finished the speech she had never gotten to give. But the world had changed. Headlines weren't just about the music anymore. They were about drama, whispers, speculation. Every step she took was shadowed by commentary. Who is she dating? Who is that song about? Is she manufactured? Is she too nice to be real? She learned a brutal truth of fame. Once you become a story, the world will keep writing it for you, unless you write it yourself. So Taylor took back the pen. Her third album would be a manifesto, not just another collection of songs, but a declaration of authorship. Speak now. Every track written by her alone. No co-writers, no safety net. Just a young woman in her early 20s, sitting with a guitar and saying the things she had never said out loud. Back to December. An apology, rare in pop music,
Rarer still from someone at the top. Dear John, a letter with edges, vulnerable, unflinching, unashamed. Mean, a response to the critics who mocked her voice, her success, her sincerity. Someday, I'll be living in a big old city, and all you're ever going to be is mean. Yes, there were charts, sales, tours, trophies, but the true victory was more private. Taylor was proving to herself and to an industry that often underestimates young women that she was not just a face on a magazine, but a writer with a spine of steel. Still, the pressure mounted. Every award speech became a tightrope, every interview an exam. Every laugh, every glance, every lyric was deconstructed online. She could feel the brand of Taylor Swift becoming bigger than the person. So she did what artists do when the world grows too loud. She went deeper into the work. She began crafting an album that would stretch her beyond country borders, a record that sounded like the heart cracking and the sky opening up at the same time. She called it Red, because some emotions are too bright, too hot, too impossible to name, and some loves don't fade to black. They burn every color on the spectrum, all at once.
When Red arrived, it didn't walk. It exploded. Country radio embraced it. Pop radio claimed it. The borders blurred, and Taylor didn't ask permission. She just crossed them. There were songs that felt like fireworks. We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, an anthem shouted through car windows on Friday nights. I Knew You Were Trouble, a confession wrapped in a bass drop, a risk that signaled the future she was brave enough to chase. And then there were the songs that didn't shout at all. They bled. Begin Again, the courage of a quiet second chance. The Last Time, a goodbye that refuses to close its eyes. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a song that started as a wound and became a legend. A song that would grow with her, change shape, and years later, break the internet. But back then, in the middle of the Red era, the conversation wasn't just about the music. It was about her relationships, her clothes, her eyes in a paparazzi photo, the way she turned heartbreak into hooks. Some praised the honesty, others mocked it. Criticism arrived with a new edge. Serial dater, too confessional, attention seeker. The labels were lazy, but they stuck like static electricity. And still, night after night, she stepped onto stages where tens of thousands were ready, not to judge, but to sing. Because fans understood what critics often miss. When a young woman writes her life, she isn't asking for permission. She's asking to be heard. On tour, the lights would fall away and something sacred would happen. One girl with a guitar, one story, thousands of voices rising to meet it. In those moments, Taylor remembered why she chose the work over the noise. But the scrutiny had a cost. The headlines felt heavier, the expectations higher, and somewhere between the first hit single and the final encore, she realized that playing by the industry's unspoken rules would never protect her. She would have to write her own. So she began to redraw the map. If they called her too country for pop, she'd make pop that felt like poetry. If they said she couldn't dance, she'd build a chorus that danced for her. If they reduced her to gossip, she'd elevate the narrative until it became art. In the quiet after Red, she made a decision that would change everything.
let the old labels fall away. Not just the genre labels, the labels people had put on her since she first stepped into the light. The girl from the Christmas tree farm had already become a woman in the public eye. Now, she was preparing to become something even rarer, an architect of her own myth. Before the world met the skyline of 1989, before the reinventions and the stadiums and the headlines that would come roaring back, there was a lesson she had carved into the marble of her career. When they tell your story for you, take the pen back. When they turn your heart into a headline, turn the headline into a song. And when they doubt the woman you're becoming, become her anyway. Because the struggles weren't detours. They were the path. They were the proof that every no she ever heard wasn't a wall. It was a door waiting to be opened.
By 2014, Taylor Swift had already conquered country music. She had Grammys. She had platinum albums. She had arenas filled with fans who sang every lyric back to her. But inside, she felt a pull, a voice whispering, "If you want to grow, you can't stay where it's safe." So Taylor made a decision that shocked the industry. She would leave behind the country sound that had carried her to fame and step fully into the world of pop. Not halfway, not a blend, a complete transformation. The album was called 1989, named after the year she was born. And just like her birth year had marked the arrival of a new decade, this record marked the arrival of a new Taylor Swift. The first single, "Shake It Off," a bold, playful anthem about ignoring the noise. Critics said she was too polished, too pop, too far from her roots. But Taylor knew exactly what she was doing. Then came Blank Space, a masterstroke of self-awareness. The media had painted her as a serial dater, a girl who turned boyfriends into ballads. So she took that caricature and turned it into art. She played the role of the unhinged, love-obsessed woman in the music video, and in doing so, she stole back the narrative. The world didn't just listen, they surrendered. 1989 became her most successful album yet. Style, Wildest Dreams, Out of the Woods. Each track was a chapter in the book of reinvention. And the industry had no choice but to crown her once again. In 2016, 1989 won the Grammy for Album of the Year. Taylor became the first woman in history to win that award twice. She had not just changed genres, she had changed the rules. She had proven that reinvention is not betrayal. It is survival. But just as the spotlight can lift you up, it can also blind you. In the years that followed 1989, the noise grew louder than ever. Feuds, rumors, celebrity drama. Her name was no longer just on music charts. It was on gossip blogs, tabloids, late-night monologues. And then came the fall. The infamous phone call, the social media storm, the moment when hashtags branded her as a liar, a manipulator, a snake. Almost overnight, the golden girl of pop music became the villain of the internet. And for the first time in her career, Taylor Swift disappeared. No public appearances, no interviews, no music. Silence. For a year, the world speculated. Had she run away? Was she finished? Was the empire of Taylor Swift crumbling? But what the world didn't know was that she was writing again. Not love letters, not fairy tales, but battle cries. In 2017, the silence broke. Taylor returned with an album called Reputation, and the very symbol that had been used to tear her down, the snake, became the emblem of her rebirth. The music was darker, sharper, heavier. Look what you made me do. A declaration that the old Taylor was dead. Ready for it. Endgame. Songs that throbbed with defiance. But beneath the armor, there were still glimpses of vulnerability. Delicate. New Year's Day. Proof that even when wrapped in barbed wire, her heart still beat with honesty. Reputation was not her most decorated album. It wasn't designed to be. It was a survival mechanism, a way to take the narrative that had been weaponized against her and make it her own. The lesson was clear. If the world calls you a snake, shed your skin and rise stronger than before.
By the end of the Reputation era, something extraordinary had happened. Taylor Swift was no longer just reacting to the story. She was controlling it. She began to speak up when she wanted to, and stay silent when she felt there was nothing to add. She released music in calculated strikes, each project a reinvention, each era a new chapter with its own color, its own world, its own rules. She wasn't just an artist anymore. She was an architect. When she released Lover in 2019, it was pastel, romantic, open-hearted, a direct contrast to the steel and shadows of Reputation, and the world embraced it. But behind the scenes, another battle was brewing, one that would challenge her legacy at its core. The masters of her first 6 albums had been sold without her consent. Her life's work, the songs she had written since she was a teenager, now belonged to someone else. For many artists, that would have been the end of the story, a bitter footnote in a brilliant career. But not for Taylor Swift. She announced she would re-record her early albums, track by track, lyric by lyric, so that the music would once again belong to her. Fans rallied, the world listened, and suddenly Taylor's version became a cultural movement. This was no longer just about awards or chart positions. This was about ownership, about an artist standing up and saying, "These songs are mine, my stories, my voice, and no one will ever take them from me again." Reinvention, by now, was no longer just a survival tactic. It was her identity, her blueprint. The girl who once begged Nashville for a chance was now a woman who rewrote the rules of the music industry itself. And as the world would soon see, this was only the beginning of the legend she was still building.
There are moments in an artist's life when the world goes quiet and the art gets louder. The year turned uncertain. Stadiums went dark. Calendars emptied like abandoned streets. Noise faded, then vanished. And in that silence, Taylor Swift did what she has always done best. She listened. To the wind. To the books on her shelves. To the memories that had been waiting patiently at the edges of her mind. She picked up a pen. She tuned a guitar. She opened a laptop and named a file, and a new door opened. Not to louder choruses, but to quieter worlds. Worlds built from whispers, photographs, old letters, and the kind of pain you don't scream, you fold carefully and tuck inside a drawer. She called the door folklore. If earlier eras were neon skylines and pop's bright constellation, folklore was a lantern in a cabin, a desk by a window, a pencil biting into paper while rain tapped the roof. This was a retreat without running away, a reinvention that chose stillness over spectacle. The collaborators changed shape, too. In came a producer known for brooding masterpieces, a craftsman of subtle chords, shadowy textures, and winter's kind of beauty. Another old friend sent melodies that felt like Polaroids warming in your hand. There were voice notes at 2 a.m., stems traded across miles, emails that said, "What if the bridge did this?" Music built like letters, not meetings. And the stories, they weren't just hers anymore. They were windows into other lives. A woman defending a house that never truly belonged to her. A girl on a neighborhood street imagining escape. A couple who learned that growing up doesn't always mean growing together. There was a triangle that became a mirror. 3 songs, 3 perspectives, 3 versions of the same summer. In one corner, innocence that thought love meant forever, that a cardigan could keep you warm in any storm. In another, the thrill of a sunlit, illicit afternoon, a breathless August that never learned the calendar. And then, a voice at the edge of a porch, a teenager named for a story a father loved, singing her side of the truth, with nothing but a harmonica of courage. These weren't gossip columns with melodies. They were short stories with scores. And listeners didn't just hear them. They moved in, unpacked boxes, and found themselves in the kitchen at midnight, rereading their own diaries with kinder eyes.
There was a song about the last great American dynasty, where wild parties, whispered judgments, and a woman who wouldn't shrink became a parable about the way history misunderstands boldness, until another woman arrives and writes a different ending. There was a song that felt like the quietest kind of cathedral, a ribbon of grief floating through a sanctuary no one can see. It sang of a war that happens in the chest, a betrayal that echoes like footsteps in an empty house, and the way some goodbyes keep their keys. There was a song for childhood, for the friend you left behind, and the creak you can still hear if you close your eyes, for the tree that knew your first secret, and the day you learned that not every door opens when you knock. There was one that looked at a mirror ball, fragile, glittering, spinning for the crowd, and confessed the exhausting choreography of being everything to everyone, while hoping someone would see the cracks and stay anyway. In folklore, Taylor didn't just write melodies. She built rooms. She let characters breathe. She let silence do part of the talking. And the world, still and frightened and hungry for gentleness, pressed its ear to the door. They found a forest. They kept walking. When the lights returned, not stadium lights, but the small lamps we turn on to say we made it through the night, the songs gathered their own constellations. Acclaim arrived, yes, the kind that comes with golden envelopes and standing ovations. But the truer reward was quieter still. Millions of listeners who took a deep breath for the first time in months and whispered, "Me too." And then, just when the world thought the chapter was closed, another page turned of its own accord. She called it Evermore. If folklore was the cabin in late summer, Evermore was the same cabin under snowfall. The stories were older, the stakes were colder, and the truths arrived like letters you'd been avoiding but finally dared to open.
The first song walked in like a spell, a hand outstretched through branches, a promise to follow where the path curved out of sight. Another song arrived carrying a secret too heavy for one pair of shoulders, a confession that never found a yes, a key dropped quietly at the foot of a door. It was the sound of two lives bridging apart with grace and devastation, the way some Christmas lights stay boxed in the attic because they would shine on the wrong memories. There was a song for the table set every night where love sat politely and looked the other way, for a note read twice and a gratitude that felt like a script, for the moment you realize you are not a partner, you're the museum piece someone refuses to dust. There was a song for a grandmother whose voice still lives between the notes, whose hands taught a little girl that music is a haunted house you must enter bravely if you want to meet the person you're meant to become. There was a song that played like a mystery novel, a knock at midnight, a crooked smile, a habit of lying, three sisters who stop asking nicely. The chorus didn't blink, neither did the audience. There were songs about ivy that grows where it's not allowed, gold rushes that glitter only until morning, and the way unfinished business keeps time like an old watch you can't throw away. The collaborators remained, a band that knew how to make winter sound like a friend, a voice that cut through the fog like a lighthouse, a producer who understood that sometimes the snare should sound like a heartbeat under a blanket. But here is the secret to this era. It wasn't an escape from reality. It was a rescue mission for it. When the world asks artists to be louder, faster, shinier, Taylor chose slower, truer, deeper. She chose sentences that landed like snow, melodies that didn't demand attention but earned it, stories that asked you to sit, not scroll. This is empowerment at its most misunderstood, not a shout, but a standard, not a clapback, but a canon, not a viral moment, but a body of work that will still feel like a home in 20 years. In Folklore and Evermore, she demonstrated a kind of authorship that is rare in pop. The courage to let the work be bigger than the moment. The humility to let characters speak for themselves. The confidence to make space for silence. And if earlier eras declared, "This is my life," these albums whispered, "These are our lives." Because somewhere between the cardigan and the willow, between the mirror ball and the ivy, listeners realized they weren't just fans of a singer, they were citizens of a country made of stories, a place where the passport is empathy and the anthem changes with the season. On a small stage lit like a living room, she sang these songs with the people who helped build them. No fireworks, no hydraulic lifts, just instruments, and the hush that happens when a room full of hearts decides to breathe together. It takes a different kind of strength to stand still and be seen, to let your voice drop to a whisper and trust it'll carry, to put away the armor and pick up a fountain pen. But make no mistake, this softness had a spine. It refused the demand to monetize every second. It rejected the notion that art must always sprint. It reminded an industry addicted to volume that resonance is not measured in decibels. There is a line artists cross when they stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What will this mean?" With Folklore and Evermore, Taylor crossed it, and she didn't look back. And as the snow melted and the forest gave way to a new spring, another truth emerged from the underbrush. She hadn't just found new songs, she had found a new authority, the kind that doesn't come from charts or headlines, but from doing the work beautifully enough that the work speaks for itself. That authority would matter for what came next, because the fight to own your story is not won only in studios and on stages. Sometimes it is won in conference rooms, in clauses, in courage. But that is the next hill. For now, remember the cabin and the snowfall, the lantern and the letter, the way a whisper can travel farther than a scream if it has somewhere honest to go. This is the storyteller era, where Taylor Swift proved that power is not always a roar. Sometimes power is a hush that makes the whole room lean in.
At midnight, the world feels different. The lights are lower, the voices quieter, and the thoughts, the ones you keep hidden in daylight, grow louder. Taylor Swift has always written in diaries, but with Midnights, she invited the world into that diary's most vulnerable hour. Not noon, not prime time, but midnight, where confessions, regrets, victories, and doubts all sit together like uninvited guests. The album wasn't designed as spectacle. It was a constellation of late-night thoughts, moments when ambition meets exhaustion, when victories feel hollow, when love is both salvation and sabotage. There were songs about revenge, but whispered like secrets under bedsheets. Songs about desire, but told with the honesty of someone who has already survived heartbreak. Songs about reflection, where the woman in the mirror isn't the girl on the magazine cover, but both voices need to be heard. One track looked at fame not as glitter, but as a funhouse mirror, distorting, exaggerating, never telling the truth. Another admitted that sometimes winning doesn't feel like enough, that no matter how high the chart position, insecurity has a way of following you home. But there was also resilience here, and humor, and the kind of intimacy you can only find when you admit that perfection was never the point. The sound of midnights shimmered with synths, echoed with electronic pulses, but at its core, it was still a diary entry, a page written under the covers, sent out to millions who also lie awake, thinking their own midnights into meaning. And when the clock struck 12, millions pressed play together. A generation sat in their bedrooms, headphones on, and realized this wasn't just an album. It was a mirror. Because everyone has their midnights, and everyone deserves to know that the whispers in the dark don't make you weak. They make you human.
But empowerment is not only about telling new stories. Sometimes it is about reclaiming the old ones. In 2019, news broke that shook the industry. The masters of Taylor Swift's first 6 albums, every song from her teenage debut through Reputation, had been sold without her consent. Her life's work, her memories, her diary entries set to melody now belonged to someone else. For many artists, this would have been a bitter ending, a cautionary tale. But Taylor saw it differently. She announced she would re-record her early albums, every lyric, every chord, every harmony, song by song, album by album, so that ownership would return to its rightful place. The world had never seen anything like it. Fans rallied instantly. Streaming platforms bent to listener demand. Suddenly, Taylor's version wasn't just a label on an album, it was a revolution. When Fearless, Taylor's version, was released, listeners weren't just replaying old hits, they were participating in an act of justice. When Red, Taylor's version, arrived, the 10-minute version of All Too Well didn't just break records, it broke silence. It gave fans the song as she had always intended it. And with each re-recording, the message grew louder. Artists deserve to own their art. Women deserve to control their work. And no contract, no business deal, no executive signature can silence the will of millions who choose integrity over convenience. This wasn't nostalgia. It was empowerment. A living example of what happens when one person refuses to surrender her story. But empowerment is not only about telling new stories. Sometimes it is about reclaiming the old ones. In 2019, news broke that shook the industry. The masters of Taylor Swift's first 6 albums, every song from her teenage debut through Reputation, had been sold without her consent. Her life's work, her memories, her diary entries set to melody, now belonged to someone else. For many artists, this would have been a bitter ending, a cautionary tale. But Taylor saw it differently. She announced she would re-record her early albums, every lyric, every chord, every harmony, song by song, album by album, so that ownership would return to its rightful place. The world had never seen anything like it. Fans rallied instantly. Streaming platforms bent to listener demand. Suddenly, Taylor's version wasn't just a label on an album, it was a revolution. When Fearless, Taylor's version, was released, listeners weren't just replaying old hits, they were participating in an act of justice. When Red, Taylor's version, arrived, the 10-minute version of All Too Well didn't just break records, it broke silence. It gave fans the song as she had always intended it. And with each re-recording, the message grew louder. Artists deserve to own their art. Women deserve to control their work. And no contract, no business deal, no executive signature can silence the will of millions who choose integrity over convenience. This wasn't nostalgia. It was empowerment. A living example of what happens when one person refuses to surrender her story. By the time Midnights and the re-recordings stood side by side, a picture had formed. Taylor Swift was no longer just a singer. She was an institution. Her albums weren't only soundtracks to our lives, they were case studies in resilience, blueprints for how to turn setbacks into stages, contracts into catalysts, criticism into craft. She had proven that reinvention is survival, that storytelling is healing, and that ownership, true ownership, isn't about signatures on paper. It's about courage in motion. Because empowerment is not a speech. It is a sequence of choices to walk away from what breaks you, to rebuild what was stolen, to let the midnight thoughts out of the diary and watch them become anthems. And maybe the most radical choice of all, to invite the world into the process, to say, this is not just my fight, it's ours. It belongs to every artist, every dreamer, every person who has ever been told, you don't own your story. Taylor's answer is clear. Reclaim it, rewrite it, sing it louder, and never hand it away again. This was ownership not as business strategy, but as empowerment, the kind of empowerment that ripples outward, teaching an entire generation that your voice, your work, your midnight thoughts are worth protecting. Because the truth is simple. When you own your story, no one else can finish it for you. And when you live that story with courage, the world doesn't just listen, it learns.
The Eras, a love letter to time. When an artist survives long enough, eras form around them. Colors, symbols, sounds, memories. Taylor didn't just notice that. She built a cathedral out of it. The tour that followed was more than a concert. It was a pilgrimage through a life's work. 3 hours that felt like 10 years compressed into one night. Chapters stitched together by choreography, cinema, and crowd song scripture. Every section arrived with its own palette and pulse. The lyric book glow of a teenage diary,
the neon audacity of pop's skyline, the hush of winter records that taught a noisy world to listen. But beneath the spectacle was something simpler, a pact. You bring your stories, I'll bring mine. We'll meet somewhere between the bridge and the chorus, and remember why songs outlive headlines. Cities pulsed, hotels filled, local economies lifted like choruses. But the truest wealth wasn't counted in receipts. It was counted in voices. Tens of thousands of them, braiding together until the arena felt less like a venue and more like a vow. We were here, together.
Mastery in plain sight. Call it business, call it craft. The truth is simpler. It's stewardship. Surprise releases that trusted wonder over marketing. Easter eggs that turned listeners into detectives. Merch that felt like artifacts, not souvenirs. And the fiercest discipline of all, saying no. No to noise. No to narratives that shrink the work. No to speed for speed's sake. If the internet is a storm, her strategy was a lighthouse, consistent, patient, unmistakably hers. Part 6. C. Quiet acts, loud ripples. Not every influence is amplified. Sometimes it travels softly through a donation with no press release, a thank you that changes a crew member's year, a decision to spotlight voices that don't often get a stage. Legacy is not just what your name draws, it's what your presence lifts.
The blueprint. Lessons you can use today. Principles. Write your own pages. Own your pen. Treat rejection as redirection. Walk back to the door they closed with better songs. Reinvent on purpose, not in panic. When the map ends, draw another. Build community, not just an audience. Let people find themselves inside your work. Protect your rights. Contracts are stories, too. Make sure yours tells the truth. Practices. Make more than you post. Post less than you make. Design eras. Name the chapter you're in. Sound, palette, symbols. Then close it with intention. Choose constraints. 3 chords can change a world, if the lyrics are brave enough. Measure meaning, not just metrics. 1,000 quiet Me Too's outweigh 1,000,000 empty views.
The last word. In the beginning, a girl asked Nashville to listen. In the middle, a woman asked the world to understand. Now, an artist asks no permission at all, only that the work be met with the same honesty that made it. The lesson isn't fame. It isn't even fortune. It's authorship. Because one day, the lights dim, the screens go dark, and the crowd files home humming a melody that refuses to end. What remains? The pages, the pen, the courage to begin again. Christmas tree farm. A borrowed guitar. A stack of notebooks. A door that didn't open. Another one that did. A stage. A snake. A stadium singing like a single voice. And somewhere tonight, another kid is learning 3 chords, wondering if it's enough. It is, if you tell the truth with them. If this chapter moved you, share it with someone who needs a beginning. For the full journey and more legends, follow the channel and leave your thoughts below. Your story might be the spark for someone else's start. This is Lessons from Legends. Until next time, keep the pen, write the page, sing it like it's yours.
The last word. In the beginning, a girl asked Nashville to listen. In the middle, a woman asked the world to understand. Now, an artist asks no permission at all, only that the work be met with the same honesty that made it. The lesson isn't fame. It isn't even fortune. It's authorship. Because one day, the lights dim, the screens go dark, and the crowd files home humming a melody that refuses to end. What remains? The pages, the pen, the courage to begin again.
Closing montage. A Christmas tree farm. A borrowed guitar. A stack of notebooks. A door that didn't open. Another one that did. A stage. A snake. A stadium singing like a single voice. And somewhere, tonight, another kid is learning 3 chords, wondering if it's enough. It is, if you tell the truth with them.
If this chapter moved you, share it with someone who needs a beginning. For the full journey and more legends, follow the channel and leave your thoughts below. Your story might be the spark for someone else's start. This is Lessons from Legends. Until next time, keep the pen, write the page, sing it like it's yours.
A love letter to time. When an artist survives long enough, errors form around them. Colors, symbols, sounds, memories. Taylor didn't just notice that. She built a cathedral out of it. The tour that followed was more than a concert. It was a pilgrimage through a life's work. 3 hours that felt like 10 years compressed into one night. Chapters stitched together by choreography, cinema, and crowd-sung scripture. Every section arrived with its own palette and pulse. The lyric book glow of a teenage diary, the neon audacity of pop skyline, the hush of winter records that taught a noisy world to listen. But beneath the spectacle was something simpler, a pact. You bring your stories, I'll bring mine. We'll meet somewhere between the bridge and the chorus and remember why songs outlive headlines. Cities pulsed, hotels filled, local economies lifted like choruses. But the truest wealth wasn't counted in receipts. It was counted in voices, tens of thousands of them, braiding together until the arena felt less like a venue and more like a vow. We were here, together.
Love letter to time. And so, when an artist survives long enough, eras form around them. Colors, symbols, sounds, and memories. Taylor Swift didn't just live through those eras, she built a cathedral out of them. Her journey reminds us that behind every headline, every stadium, every note, lies a simple truth. The stories we carry and the voices we share are worth more than numbers, charts, or receipts. Because in the end, it's not the trophies we remember. It's the pact between the storyteller and the listener. It's the chorus that thousands sing together until the room itself feels like a vow. We were here, together. This has been Lessons from Legends. Until next time, keep the pen, write the page, and remember, your story matters.